The full release of Dead or Alive 6 is right around the corner from us. I've been playing the game a lot in the process of getting my full review together, but a lot of fans have been able to get some good quality hands-on time with it anyway through what is effectively the final version of the game that was released as a demo over the weekend. I've got a lot of thoughts about the game to share with my review and future videos and the like, but in the lead up to that I wanted to do a video that looks at a single particular topic, which is always the focus of any discussion about Dead or Alive. I do of course mean the sex. Dead or Alive has always been known as a game that puts sexuality first and foremost. This has been often to the series' detriment, preventing it from ever entering the mainstream fighting game circles, even though the underlying combat action has always been so solid. Equally, the sex themes have often drawn some very sharp criticism for their exploitation and the like. When Dead or Alive 6 was first announced, the director of the game came out with words to the effect of, "We're toning that side of things down," that side of things being the sex. This drew criticism and concern from another side of the market, specifically those fans that rather liked the sexiness of the series, and I admit I was one to voice initial concern about that. I even did a video on those concerns, which I should take down, but I won't. I'll leave it there to my great embarrassment, because I was pretty much proven wrong. We'll get onto that in a second, but those concerns were based on little more than the director's comments and the initial highly controlled reveal, so I'm quite happy to actually have been proven wrong on that one, to be honest. Because Dead or Alive 6 is by far the sexiest game in the series to date. In fact, it's quite possibly the sexiest game ever made. Now, before you go stretching for the dislike button because I've dared to voice such an opinion like that, I do have reasons for it, so please do listen on. With the earlier Dead or Alive games, the first 4 as well as the first couple in the Dead or Alive Extreme sub-series, there were some very significant technical limitations in terms of what the developers at Koei Tecmo could do with their character models and designs. Because of this, the punkish director of those early games, Tomonobu Itagaki, decided to go with what I would like to call the mannequin look. The characters, especially the girls, all had this very plastic aesthetic where they had a human shape, of course, but it was a hyper-real one. They looked like plastic dolls designed to be an extreme fantasy on the human body. Digital Barbie dolls, if you will. It was actually a brilliant way of doing sex at a time in game development before technology was able to render realistic looking people. But it did have a consequence that the characters all looked very hyper-real and therefore quite comical when you look at them closely. It helped though that Itagaki really played to that sense of the ridiculous and the absurd and added kind of gravity-defying boob physics that the series instantly became very infamous for. Mesmerizing as the wobble could be, it was clearly done with a satirical and hyperbolic intent. Those characters, much like the more modern approach to Barbie dolls, can easily be seen as much as a critique satire on the idea of the perfect female form as something designed to titillate. In fact, I would say that they're definitely not there as an example of titillation. It came about because of a technical limitation, sure, but it was cleverly worked in such a way that it really enhanced the overall satirical tone of the series. Now, Dead or Alive isn't the only franchise to do it. It might have been pretty close to the first, but it's not the only one. There's been quite a few that have done similar things since. Senran Kagura is very much as infamous for its satirical taken boobs that are ridiculous in size as Dead or Alive has ever been. Also B-tier properties such as Oninchabara and Schoolgirl Zombie Hunter also hyper-exaggerate the female form in order to induce a sense of satire into their games. I'll leave it to other people to debate about the merits or value of doing this. I'm well and truly tired of having that debate at this particular point in time. It's really grown tiring as somebody that reviews a lot of these kinds of games. But the point is that this is a common enough theme in video games, and this is the reason it's done, for satire. I've never looked at any of these games I've mentioned above and thought to myself, well, this is sexy. There's a difference. I'm of the belief that genuine sexiness is something that's a little harder to achieve than to stick giant wobbling boobs on a mass of polygons shaped into a human form. And that's why I found it quite amusing every time there's been a blow-up about Dead or Alive toning down the sexuality. You may remember back when Dead or Alive 5 was first announced for the PlayStation 3, there was a similar blow-up, because Koei Tecmo was out there talking about their attempts to tone down the sexuality. Really, all they did was remove the gravity-defying boobs in favour of a more natural bounce. And that made sense since Dead or Alive 5 was the first attempt to ditch the mannequin look in the character models for something that was more naturalistic in tone itself. At launch, Dead or Alive 5 did come across as toned down in terms of the outrageous fan service. That fan service was added in via DLC later on, with ever skimpier swimsuits, Halloween fetish wear, and destructible costumes complementing the more natural themed base costumes. And yet, Dead or Alive 5 was a far more sexy game compared to its predecessors, for the way that the sweat would roll off the characters' bodies and the way that their shirts would become translucent as they got wet. Sometimes subtlety is sexier, and the hint of a lacy bra under a somewhat transparent shirt is so much more of a playful sexiness than an outrageously bouncing chest. Dead or Alive 5, however, was inhibited a little bit by the power of the consoles that it was initially developed for. In trying to be more realistic, the poor clipping of hair through the body, or the slightly jagged angles on curves on the body because there were still limits to the number of polygons that a character could be constructed out of, all of that kind of thing took its toll on the overall look of the game. Limits in how a character could be animated also meant that they tended to do some very unnatural looking twisting when executing their attacks. If you still have a copy of Dead or Alive 5 lying around, jump into the game's photo mode during a match to see the characters wound up like corkscrews. It's a ridiculous effect. Don't get me wrong, I spent hundreds of hours playing Dead or Alive 5 over many years, but I did feel that it always fell short of being truly sexy because the realism was still inhibited by the technology. Now, Dead or Alive 6 will no doubt be replaced by something else years down the track, but for now it's truly astounding how detailed and authentic the character models are, and that is sexy. There are subtleties in movement and behaviour, especially during the walk-on and the win-loss ending animations, which are just so perfectly optimized for highlighting a sensuality and sexuality about the characters. Costumes too might not be so outrageously sexy right now, but again, they're a case of often being sexy via sensuality. Nico, for example, doesn't need to wear a thong bikini to be sexy. Her hot pants and the way that the sweat rolls down her legs as she strikes a victory pose is still incredibly sexy. Also, I say that the costumes are not outrageous right now because already Koei is making it quite clear that DLC will fix that right up, just as it did with Dead or Alive 5. The first costume DLC is a bunch of wedding dresses, for example, and getting Marie Rose into a wedding dress is really living the dream, the fan service dream. The point that I'm making here through all of this is that Dead or Alive 6 is incredibly sexy and genuinely sexy. It hasn't turned down that side of things at all. What it has turned down is the satirical, hyperbolic side. It's no longer necessary to do plastic mannequin character bodies and faces, because the technologies are just that far advanced beyond that, especially for a developer with the kind of resources that Koei Tecmo does. And I do understand if some people out there end up missing that from the game. I feel like, too, outside of the story mode, Dead or Alive has lost a little of its sense of silliness, and I always enjoyed that about the series, so I do feel a little bit of a loss there. But as for the sexuality, no, I have to say that I do think that Dead or Alive 6 is more subtle, but it's definitely the sexiest of all. So thanks very much for tuning into this video. I'm very keen to hear about what others think about this shift in direction for the series. Whether you want to see the old Dead or Alive Return, or if you're like me, you're quite happy with the way that Koei is doing things now. Otherwise, I'm going to have plenty more Dead or Alive 6 coverage this week, don't you worry about that, leading right up to my review, so do stay tuned, and we will see you at the next video.